G'day mates, my name is Mordecai, and welcome to this year's Monster Week, hosted by Ginny D and Pointy Hat. This year the theme is all about the creatures of the Feywild. The hags, the archfey, the famously pesky tricksters, and other fascinating life that most commoners thankfully don't have to interact with on the material plane. However, my research into the mystical Fey isn't covering a specific creature from the Feywild. Rather, there is a topic that I wanted to research which is innately tied to such creatures. That being, how to make one's true name toxic to the Fae. I'm not necessarily talking about making a person's given name a literal trap for the Fae, though that is a related topic. In fact, part of the reason why I'm invested into this, perhaps to the surprise of some, is that I've been working on a setting. A setting in which a particular NPC has made their true name lethal to Fey creatures. We'll get into exploring a bit of that setting, as well as the NPC in question, later on in this video. Because, much like how all of my research goes, I find that there is value in the journey, in recounting how I made certain discoveries, and so, let us begin where I did. You might be wondering about what the significance of a true name is, or what that means. After all, you don't need to know the true name of the demon, dragon, or be-big to be able to royally wreck their nonsense, save the world, and so on. But there's a difference between doing all of that and being able to, say, truly embarrass them. In a nutshell, that is exactly what knowing a creature's true name allows you to do. In the Lore of the Forgotten Realms setting, a true name is a unique identifier for every creature within the Words of Creation, which effectively resembles a codex or library, a library that records both given names and true names per being, so it makes it impossible for John Barbarian to be confused with the several thousand other John Barbarians. These Words of Creation form its own primal power language as well, which is able to exert very real effects on the world when spoken aloud and correctly. If a being knows the language behind the Words of Creation, it wouldn't take much effort to learn another creature's true name. Symbolically, knowing the true name of a creature grants you power over that creature. Often this allows the exertion of various effects upon the victim, such as completely shutting down their spellcasting, or in some extreme cases, being granted complete control over them. Thankfully, there are some universal safeguards in place. Most mortals' true names have rather indirect correlation to their given or birth name. It helps that if you share the exact same given name with, say, a dozen other people, it helps you hide your own to a degree when giving your name to someone. Makes it much harder to cross-reference your specific true name in the Words of Creation. Moreover, the vast majority of true names are hidden, and are meant to be safeguarded by the gods. And as beings ascertain greater power or more significant accomplishments, their true name may become more difficult to correctly pronounce with the primal language. Despite these safeguards being in place, this may not prevent such names from being discovered, especially by those who seek such knowledge frivolously, or for more nefarious purposes, such as the aforementioned mental domination. Suffice to say, guarding one's true name should be a priority, especially from the supernatural abilities of the denizens of the Feywild. The Feywild, for those who don't know, it is a parallel planar echo to the material plane, in which the landscape is equal parts more exotic and fantastical. There's actually a rule of thumb for any dealings with the Fey. Under no circumstances should you reveal your name to a Fey creature. Now, for those warlocks who are pacted to an archfey, it's technically already too late. But, as tricksy as the archfey can be, such a pact would logically involve a built-in safeguard that prevents other Fey from doing anything with the pacted via knowledge of their true name. Thus, they should be quite safe. For everyone else, they are still firmly in the metaphorical danger zone. Since Fey are creatures more akin to unrestrained emotion, rather than the flesh and blood that are associated with the material plane, this changes the context in which they utilize these true names. Instead of employing a mental compulsion to control a victim, they are much more likely to steal their identity. I don't mean that in a posing as someone else manner. I mean that the essence of who that person is no longer is, down to their memories, their thoughts, and naturally their emotions. The part of this that really stands out is that because of their tricksy nature, the more potent Fae can derive what a creature's true name is from their given name. Because being innately tied to whimsy and flotsam, and the innate masquerade that the Feywild embraces, they know the how on how to discern a John Barbarian from another John Barbarian. That is why, under no circumstances, should you reveal your name to a Fey creature. On second thought, adventurers may not even need to leave the material plane to have a chance encounter with such a Fey creature. Heck, one doesn't even need to get invested into TTRPGs to find one, because we have a perfect example of such a beast in the aptly named Mr. Beast. I know that sounds like a far-fetched claim to make, but do hear me out, and let me cook this joke for you all. His content is a gingerbread house made of highly clickbait titles and thumbnails that are designed to entice younger viewers, but offering them no nourishment. We can't forget the dead eyes and that uncanny valley smile either. He makes candy bars that he goes out of his way to mention over and over how much healthier and better they are when compared to the competition. A candy bar which, upon any critical inspection, only looks promising at face value. And he also used it in conjunction to do a collaborative product called Lunchly, with the likes of KSI and Logan Paul. Yeah, that Logan Paul. The same one I don't need to trash talk because there are no phrases, there are no sentences, there are no words that can exist to express just how inadequate he is. Back to the topic at hand, I bring this up because I find it hilarious that despite being called Mr. Beast, he does everything he can to effectively cosplay as a hag, down to having a coven and all. No, seriously, I'm surprised this clip of him and his quote-unquote coven literally carrying a giant Lunchly box hasn't hit perpetual internet meme status, because this was the only way such a product was ever going to have a snowflake's chance in the Nine Hells. What I am saying is that he does indeed rely on smoke and mirrors, tricks and deception, instead of delivering. Just like hags in Dungeons and Dragons do. In before he finds role-playing as a hag as a dungeon master easy. So now that we've covered the power the Fae can muster over one's true name, we shall embark upon the next stage towards making such toxic to the Fae. Which means that we need a character, one sufficiently motivated to do so. And it just so happens that I know of someone who is motivated towards making the Fae about as feeble as Jumbucks. May I introduce the NPC for such a role, Zan Galstrom. Zan Galstrom is an elderly Kenku living in House Hythvale, enjoying a position of power from behind the political scenes. Despite being an old man in service of Tidal Reef as its head spymaster, there was a time in his youth that Zan had very different priorities in his life. He was once a rather carefree individual when he was young, living a simple life. But that didn't mean that his life was free of trouble. On the contrary, his parents frequently argued. The older Zan got, the worse and more drastically intense the nigh-daily arguing got. It seemed to escalate from entirely mundane and easily resolvable quarrels. A slightly misplaced chair here, a pencil dropped on the floor over there, the kitchen cabinet being slightly misarranged, food being too hot, dinner being served too soon, the list goes on. Zan doesn't even remember why, or how it all started, just that hearing these arguments made him feel terrible deep down. But he fully remembers how it ended, because he was indirectly responsible for that. He wasn't exactly the wisest teenager at the time, just simply someone who had been hurting for a long time. It was after a very brutal and heated argument between his parents that he felt he had to get out of the house that fateful afternoon. He went for a stroll, deep into the local woods. Deeper than he had ever been. Deeper than he should ever have. He had wanted to leave it all behind. And who could blame him? And it was deep in those woods that he found a strange hut, warm and inviting. The seemingly kind elderly lady within offered him rare compassion. He told her his woes, and how he desired for his parents to cease their arguing. The old lady gave him 2 vials of a glowing yellow liquid, and had instructed him to have his parents quaff that. In exchange, their arguing would stop, and he could go back to having a happy life at home. He got his desire for his parents to stop arguing. How could they continue to argue when both were no longer able to speak, able to walk, able to move, or able to breathe? It took Zan all of 10 seconds to realize what it was he himself had done, what he had been manipulated into doing. It took him longer than he cared to admit, to finally put his parents to rest in the local cemetery, to mourn that which would no longer be. He threw himself into the world, seeking some means by which to right his biggest wrong. He dedicated his efforts towards becoming a spy for House Highvale, and in his heart and mind, he swore that he would never again allow any Fey creature to harm those that he cared about. That he would never again be manipulated in such a heinous way. Instead, he learned well how to manipulate others, how to tug the right strings to produce the results he wanted, to keep Tidal Reef safe from espionage and trickery, especially from the trickiest of them all. Now, Zan does have some advantages over a player character. Being an NPC, how he made both his true name and given name toxic to the Fae doesn't necessarily need to be explored. Plus, being a spy master, he has sufficient reason to remain silent on the topic, to disavow all knowledge of it, and so forth. But what about a player character? Well, this was where I ran into a research roadblock. Because whilst I'm not exactly a dungeon master per se, I am invested in building up the setting in which Zan exists. And I wanted to have an answer for world building purposes. Thus, I turned to the community of content creators making videos for Monster Week this year for inspiration and insight. And I'm going to give a huge shout out to that community, because the variety of the answers to this query were all excellent ideas.
Well, my first thought is of the concept of the Tetragrammaton, where there is a being that is so powerful that just saying their name obliterates you or curses you. Similarly, with a curse, you could create a curse where the name is the last word of the curse and seals it. And if a Fae says that name, then the curse is sealed around them and enacted. I hope that helps.
See, everybody knows that the Fae are the original identity thieves, but they don't want your social security number or your credit card number. They want your true name, because then they got your soul and they got you over a barrel and they're in control. But what not everybody realizes is you can defend against this. You just need a diet high enough in iron. So anytime you think you might, like, hey, I might run into some Fae creatures and they might try to steal my name, what you do is you just sit down and you tuck into a nice big steak, bloody, rare. The rare as you can tolerate it. Shoot, tartar is best. but then you sprinkle just a little bit of iron filings on top of it. And yeah, it's gritty, it's hard to chew, and you might have a little bit of problem in the bathroom, but like, it's worth it to keep your name and keep your soul.
How do you stop the Fae from using your name against you? Names are powerful, and true names even more so. And I don't mean simply the name that your parents gave you as a child. Think of it as a pearl. There is a core, yes, but around it layers form, creating your beautiful and complex identity. So how do you stop Fae from using it? Well, an option is to ask a god for help. Maybe a deity of mystery can shroud your name with mist. Or maybe, since cold iron is anathema for the Fae, you can start being more iron-like. If you acquire those qualities for yourself, maybe your true name will become itself iron-like. So the Fae will find it toxic and poisonous. And if all of that fails, well, maybe if you change enough as a person, the true name that the Fae hold against you will no longer be updated. So maybe that works? I don't know.
So this really only works in modern fantasy, but one of the tropes that I love is the trope of not giving them your true name when a Fae asks for it. Instead, giving them a username from an old 2006 Neopets account, for example.
Hey Mordecai, this is Pittsburgh Pat. So my idea was if they say the true name, then poof, it explodes like a glyph of warning. 5d6 acid damage.
What happens exactly when you reveal the true name of an archfey depends on where the archfey dwells. I really mean that. If the archfey is a denizen of a domain of dread, and especially if an archfey is the Dark Lord of a domain of dread, if in other words the archfey lives in the Shadowfell or in Ravenloft, then the revelation of their true name should be a terrible thing, a scary thing, something world-sundering and tragic. But if the archfey rules over a domain of delight in the Feywild, I think that an archfey who ruled a Feywild domain would have to do a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical number when their true name was revealed. So, if the Archfey rules a domain of dread, then the revelation of their true name would have a reaction like Galadriel when she's offered the ring and freaks out, and it'd be all scary. But if the Archfey rules a domain of delight, then the revelation of their true name would be like, Be Our Guest from Disney's Beauty and the Beast, or something like that.
Here's my answer, Mordecai. Why aren't we supposed to use their names? Why can't we say fairies, but should use the fair folk? Going further, why not Voldemort or Bloody Mary? Why did some people refer to the devil as Old Nick? No relation. It's out of fear of summoning them, of drawing their attention. I say, turn the tables on them. Become such a terrifying presence that they would not dare draw your attention. Become a thing they warn their children about.
I'd like to thank everyone that contributed their ideas on toxifying a name, and especially to those who had ideas that they were able to write down to send to me, but were caught up in their own matters related to the Fae. So in honour of their contributions, let's go over the remaining suggestions from the community of content creators. Starting with the ghost herself, Ginny D. Ginny suggested hiding the letters of the word iron in your character's name. Actually, this is the second time the idea that iron is toxic to the Fae has cropped up amongst these suggestions. Is iron toxic to the Fae in the same way that the heavy metal lead is to most life on the material plane? I couldn't find any correlation, but I can see that being the case. Regardless, Ginny also added that the easiest answer she envisioned would be to have some kind of ritual, likely a forbidden one, to poison your true name, and that part of this ritual should involve destruction of the original true name. Something truly weighty and considerable, but definitely worth the effort. Next, we have two contributions from Shifty Switchbox. The main idea was to establish a pact with the Raven Queen, or an important entity from the Shadowfell. The lesser definitely has its appeals, as some depictions of the planar realms place the Shadowfell on the polar opposite side to the Feywild, as they have strongly opposing properties. Additionally, Switchbox did mention that at the end of the day, so long as it doesn't seem like hand-wavium, the DM can make a call on how this plays out. Lastly, we have 2 suggestions from DexSaves D&D. The first contribution is to give your old name to a greater entity of the Shadowfell for them to create a new name for you, one that is inherently trapped. Alternatively, you could consult with an expert in the arcane, someone who is really knowledgeable about the nature of name magic, to create a trap of this nature. Ideally, such a trap should involve a ritual designed to oppose the nature of Fey magic. A huge shout out to the community, because I like all of these ideas. They're fun and creative, some of them are tricky enough to out-trick the Fey tricksters, and most importantly, it helped me nail down how Zan made his true name toxic to the Fey. Now, I was on the fence about whether or not I would reveal this. My main reason was that I was initially against potentially spoiling some of the intrigue behind the Spy Master for one of the sub-factions in a faction within the setting I was building, but then it occurred to me that sometimes spoilers make the discovery of those secrets in setting far more enjoyable for the players at the table. Plus, whilst it would be fitting in a video about the Fae, it would be a very mean trick to not reveal how this journey ends. As part of the history of Tidal Reef, several ancient dream spirits made their debut in the material plane in a very particular location off the eastern coast of the easternmost island in the archipelago. This location, set deep in an underwater trench defended with natural geysers, once formed a two-way portal to the dream world. Most notably, each of the so-called major dream spirits would become associated with particular major houses in the Tidal Reef nobility, at least behind the scenes. One of these is referred to as the Helix Emerald, depicted as this hooded cobra with green glowing eyes. The Helix Emerald has strong yet hidden ties to House Hyphael, since she is primarily concerned with anticipating threats and future events regarding Tidal Reef and, by extension, her fellow dream spirits. These dream spirits also have artifacts associated with them, and they themselves are capable of forming warlock pacts, and to a lesser degree, can perform acts akin to divine intervention, which can include obfuscating and obscuring information, prevention of scrying, and even poisoning a true name. When Zan became the head spy master for House Hyphael, part of his responsibilities included inheriting and using the artifact of House Hyphael, the same one that is associated with the Helix Emerald. Since Zan is technically pacted to a degree with the Helix Emerald, she is directly responsible for making Zan's name akin to poison. Those who attempt to bind either his given name or his true name in any kind of bind have to answer to the venom of the Helix Emerald. And this venom is dangerously lethal. Okay, this is a fairly hand-wavy and or wishy-washy method of doing so, but this is how Zan's true name became toxic to the Fae, in fairly broad strokes. The point is that there are some very creative ways to make someone's true name poisonous to the Fae. In the case of Zan, his names are lethal to even attempt to manipulate with arcane trickery. But poisonous names can have a variety of meanings, so what a toxic name means depends upon the DM, the setting, and what can be arranged. Just what are the consequences of a toxic name? That, my friends, is up to you. I'd like to thank both Pointy Hat and Ginny D for hosting Monster Week, as well as to all those who contributed to my research, including the goat herself, Ginny D. I'd also like to thank Misty Steps, Jason Bowers, McCaries, Salty Nick, Questboard Terrain, Pittsburgh Pat, and Altered World Experience for contributing to the montage of ideas. And I also extend my thanks to Shifty Switchbox and DexSaves D&D for their contributions to the research. The link to their channels is in the description down below. I'd also like to thank you, my audience, for watching this video, and especially to those that have watched all the way through. I'd like to ask that you do subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more content in the future. Thanks again, mates, and have a good one.